Have you ever found yourself in a meeting, listening to someone present an idea that's so poorly thought out you wonder how they even made it out of bed that morning? Or maybe you've had to deal with a coworker who consistently misses deadlines and you're left picking up the pieces? Yeah, we've all been there. It's like, what's going on in their heads? Are they even trying? Well, it turns out you're not alone. In fact, Thomas Erikson, the author of Surrounded by Idiots, would say that these kinds of interactions are not just frustrating, but also completely predictable. According to Erikson, there are actually 4 main types of idiots we encounter in our daily lives, and understanding what makes them tick is the key to preserving our sanity. Now, before you start imagining a world where everyone's walking around with a label on their forehead, don't worry, it's not about labeling people or being judgmental. It's about recognizing patterns of behavior that can drive us crazy and learning how to navigate those situations with a bit more empathy and a lot more humor. As we dive into the world of Surrounded by Idiots, you'll start to recognize these patterns in your own life, and trust me, it's a game changer. You'll learn how to communicate more effectively with that annoying coworker, how to handle those infuriating customer service calls, and even how to make sense of your friend's reckless decisions. So, buckle up and let's take a journey into the fascinating, if sometimes infuriating, world of human behavior. This script aims to create a conversational tone, weaving in relatable stories and examples to grab the listener's attention. It introduces the book and its central theme, hinting at the value and insights the listener will gain while maintaining a lighthearted and engaging tone. Section 1. Have you ever found yourself wondering what makes someone tick? You know, that one person who consistently makes decisions that leave you scratching your head, or the friend who always seems to assume the worst in people. It's easy to write them off as, well, idiots. But is it really that simple? Is it just a lack of intelligence, or is there something more complex at play? As Thomas Erikson points out in his book Surrounded by Idiots, the answer lies in the realm of psychology. Specifically, it's the interplay between cognitive biases, emotional intelligence, and personality traits that can lead to behavior that, shall we say, doesn't exactly inspire confidence. Let's take the example of a manager who consistently favors one employee over others. On the surface, it might seem like a simple case of favoritism, but dig deeper and you might find that there are some underlying cognitive biases at work. Maybe the manager has a confirmation bias, where they tend to seek out information that confirms their pre-existing opinions about the favored employee. Or perhaps they're succumbing to the halo effect, where they're letting one positive trait or characteristic overshadow all the others. This isn't just speculation, by the way. Studies have shown that confirmation bias can have a profound impact on decision-making. In one study, participants were given a series of numbers and asked to determine whether they followed a particular pattern. The catch was that the numbers were actually randomly generated, but the participants were given a hypothesis to test. What happened? Well, the participants tended to focus on the numbers that supported their hypothesis while ignoring the ones that contradicted it. It's a classic case of confirmation bias in action. Now you might be thinking, okay, but what about emotional intelligence? Doesn't that play a role in decision-making too? Absolutely. Emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize and regulate your own emotions as well as the emotions of others. And it's a crucial factor in making informed, rational decisions. Consider the example of a person with low emotional intelligence. Let's call them Alex. Alex tends to fly off the handle whenever someone disagrees with them, and they have a hard time understanding why others might be upset by their behavior. When faced with a conflict, Alex tends to become aggressive and defensive rather than taking a step back to try to understand the other person's perspective. As Erikson points out, this kind of behavior can be incredibly damaging to relationships. When we're unable to regulate our own emotions, we tend to lash out at others, which can lead to a breakdown in communication and trust. And it's not just personal relationships that suffer. Low emotional intelligence can also have serious consequences in the workplace. But here's the thing, emotional intelligence can be learned. It's not an innate trait, and it's not something that you either have or you don't. With practice and self-awareness, we can develop our emotional intelligence and become better decision-makers as a result. So what about personality traits? How do they fit into the equation? Well, it turns out that certain personality traits can predispose us to certain types of behavior. For example, someone with a highly anxious personality might be more prone to catastrophizing, assuming the worst-case scenario, even when there's no evidence to support it. I have a friend who's like this. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah always assumes the worst in people. If someone cancels plans at the last minute, she assumes it's because they don't like her. If someone doesn't return her call right away, She assumes they're ignoring her. It's exhausting, to be honest. But it's also a classic example of how personality traits can shape our behavior and interactions with others. So what can we do about it? How can we avoid falling into these traps and becoming, well, idiots? The first step is to become more aware of our own biases and tendencies. Take a step back and try to recognize when you're succumbing to confirmation bias or letting your emotions get the better of you. It's not easy, of course. It takes practice and self-awareness. But the payoff is worth it. By becoming more aware of our own psychology, we can make better decisions, build stronger relationships, and avoid becoming the kind of person who consistently makes others wonder what on earth they're thinking. And that's the key, really. It's not about labeling others as idiots, but about recognizing the complexities of human psychology and working to become better versions of ourselves. As Erikson so astutely points out, we're all surrounded by idiots, but with a little self-awareness and understanding, we can avoid becoming one of them. Section 2. Have you ever found yourself in a conversation where you're trying to get your point across, but the other person just isn't listening? They're too busy interrupting, dismissing your concerns, or getting defensive. It's like trying to have a conversation with a brick wall, except the brick wall doesn't get offended and storm off. We've all been there, and it's frustrating, to say the least. But what if I told you that this kind of behavior is more common than you think? In fact, it's a hallmark of idiots, according to Thomas Erikson, author of Surrounded by Idiots. Erikson argues that idiots often struggle with effective communication, leading to misunderstandings, conflicts, and frustration. Let me tell you a story about a colleague I used to work with. We'll call him Alex. Alex was a lovely guy, but he had this annoying habit of interrupting everyone. You'd be mid-sentence and he'd jump in with his own thoughts, completely derailing the conversation. It was like he had a fear of silence or something. The problem was Alex never actually listened to what you were saying. He'd just wait for a pause and then launch into his own monologue. One day, I was trying to explain a complex project to Alex and he kept interrupting me. I finally lost my cool and said, "Alex, can you please just let me finish?" He looked taken aback, but I could see the realization dawning on him. He apologized and made an effort to listen more carefully. It was a small victory, but it made a huge difference in our working relationship. Now, Alex's behavior is a classic example of passive-aggressive communication. On the surface, he seemed friendly and engaged, but beneath that, he was dismissing my thoughts and opinions. Passive-aggressive behavior is a subtle way of expressing negative feelings, often through actions rather than words. It's like a slow-acting poison, eroding trust and respect in relationships. Another way idiots communicate is through defensiveness. We've all been guilty of getting defensive at some point, but idiots take it to a whole new level. They'll deny any wrongdoing, shift the blame, or even attack the other person. It's like they're trying to protect themselves from criticism, but in reality, they're just making things worse. I recall a conversation I had with my partner where I expressed some concerns about our relationship. Instead of listening and addressing my concerns, she dismissed them outright, saying I was being too sensitive. It felt like she wasn't taking my feelings seriously, and it led to a bigger argument. In hindsight, I realized that she was being defensive and I was being dismissive. We both needed to take a step back and listen to each other. So, how can we avoid being idiots in our communication? One key strategy is to practice active listening. This means paying attention to the other person, asking questions, and clarifying their thoughts. It's not just about hearing the words, it's about understanding the underlying emotions and needs. Using I statements is another effective way to communicate. Instead of saying you always or you never, try saying I feel or I think. This helps to own your emotions and thoughts rather than blaming the other person. For example, if someone interrupts you, instead of saying you always interrupt me, say I feel frustrated when I'm interrupted. Can you please let me finish? Managers can also play a crucial role in facilitating open and honest communication. By creating a safe and supportive environment, they can encourage employees to share their thoughts and concerns. This might involve regular team meetings, anonymous feedback channels, or even just an open-door policy. In the end, effective communication is about being willing to listen, learn, and adapt. It's not about being right or wrong, it's about being heard and understood. As Erikson says, communication is not just about conveying information, it's about building relationships and creating a sense of community. So, the next time you find yourself in a conversation with someone who's being an idiot, take a deep breath and try to understand where they're coming from. Use active listening, I statements, and empathy to build a bridge rather than a wall. And who knows, you might just find that the idiot in front of you is actually a kindred spirit waiting to be heard and understood. Section 3. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you're dealing with someone who seems completely unreasonable? Maybe it's a coworker who refuses to listen to your ideas or a family member who always seems to find fault in everything you do. Whatever the situation, it's easy to feel like you're going crazy when surrounded by people who just don't seem to get it. But here's the thing, we can't control how others behave, but we can control how we respond to them. And that's where the art of dealing with idiots comes in. Now, I know what you're thinking, isn't it just easier to avoid these people altogether? Well, sometimes that's not possible, and even when it is, avoidance can lead to feelings of resentment and frustration that simmer just below the surface. So, what's the alternative? Thomas Erikson, in his book Surrounded by Idiots, suggests that effective communication is key. But what does that really mean? For many of us, effective communication means being clear and direct, but it's not always that simple. Sometimes being too direct can come across as aggressive or confrontational, which can escalate the situation. Let me tell you a story about a friend of mine who found herself in a difficult conversation with a coworker. They were working on a project together, and my friend had some concerns about the direction it was headed. She tried to express her concerns in a clear and direct way, but her coworker became defensive and dismissive. The conversation quickly turned into a heated argument, with both parties feeling like they weren't being heard. But then my friend did something that completely flipped the script. She took a deep breath and asked her coworker to explain their perspective. She listened attentively, asking questions and seeking clarification, and suddenly the tone of the conversation shifted. Her coworker began to open up, sharing their concerns and fears, and my friend was able to find common ground. They were able to work together to find a solution that met both of their needs. So, what happened in that moment? My friend used a technique called gray rock to de-escalate the conflict. By remaining calm and neutral like a gray rock, she was able to create space for her coworker to express themselves without feeling attacked or judged. And by seeking common ground, she was able to find a solution that worked for everyone. Now, I know this sounds simple, but it's not always easy. Sometimes our emotions get the better of us and we react impulsively. But the key is to take a step back, breathe, and approach the situation with a clear head. And that's where assertive communication comes in. Assertive communication is about being clear and direct while still being respectful and empathetic. It's about setting boundaries without being aggressive or confrontational. And it's about seeking common ground without sacrificing your own needs. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're working on a team project and one of your team members is consistently late to meetings. You've tried talking to them about it, but they just brush it off, saying they're busy. You could get frustrated and accusatory, but that's unlikely to solve the problem. Instead, you could try using collaborative problem solving to find a solution. You might say something like, "Hey, I've noticed you've been late to our meetings a few times. I understand we're all busy, but it's impacting our ability to work together as a team. Can we brainstorm some solutions that might work for everyone?" By framing the problem as a shared challenge rather than a personal failing, you're more likely to get a positive response. And that's the power of assertive communication. By being clear, direct, and respectful, you can set boundaries without damaging relationships. And by seeking common ground, you can find solutions that work for everyone. Of course, this isn't always easy, especially when dealing with toxic or manipulative people. But even in those situations, setting clear boundaries and seeking common ground can be incredibly powerful. I have a friend who set healthy boundaries with a toxic family member, and it completely transformed their relationship. It wasn't easy, and it took a lot of effort and support from loved ones. But by being clear and direct about their needs and by seeking common ground, my friend was able to create a more positive and healthy dynamic. So, what can we take away from all this? Dealing with idiots is never easy, but it's not impossible. By using effective communication, setting clear boundaries, and seeking common ground, we can navigate even the most challenging situations with ease. And by staying calm, empathetic, and assertive, we can create positive outcomes that work for everyone. As Thomas Erikson says in his book, Surrounded by Idiots, when we communicate effectively, we can solve problems, build trust, and create strong relationships. And that's the art of dealing with idiots in a nutshell. It's not about avoiding difficult people or situations, it's about approaching them with empathy, understanding, and a willingness to find common ground. Section 4. Imagine you're part of a well-oiled machine, a team that's firing on all cylinders, working towards a common goal. And then suddenly one person comes along and throws a wrench into the works. We've all been there, the frustration, the disappointment, the feeling that this one person is holding everyone back. But have you ever stopped to think about the real impact that one person can have on an entire team or organization? In his book, Surrounded by Idiots, Thomas Erikson explores the effects of idiotic behavior on group dynamics. And what he found is both fascinating and unsettling. When one person exhibits idiotic behavior, it can lead to decreased productivity, low morale, and high turnover. In other words, one bad apple really can spoil the whole bunch. But why is that? What is it about idiotic behavior that has such a profound impact on teams and organizations? To answer that question, let's take a look at a study on the effects of toxic employees on team performance. The study found that when a team has just one toxic member, it can lead to a significant decrease in overall team performance. In fact, the study showed that a single toxic employee can reduce team performance by up to 40%. That's staggering. But it's not just about the numbers. The real issue here is the way that idiotic behavior can erode team cohesion. When one person is consistently causing problems, it creates tension and conflict within the team. And if that conflict isn't addressed promptly, it can lead to a toxic work culture. I want to share a story with you that illustrates this point perfectly. There was a team at a marketing firm that was working on a big project. They were all excited and motivated, but one team member, let's call him John, was consistently causing problems. He would show up late to meetings, interrupt others, and dominate the conversation. The rest of the team was getting frustrated, but they didn't know how to deal with John's behavior. Finally, the team leader decided to address the issue head-on. She sat down with John and explained how his behavior was affecting the team. She also made it clear that she expected him to change his ways. And you know what? It worked. John started making an effort to be more considerate and collaborative, and the team's dynamics completely shifted. They started working together more effectively and their productivity soared. But here's the thing, it's not just about addressing conflicts promptly. It's also about fostering a positive work culture. When a team has a positive culture, it's like a shield that protects them from the negative effects of idiotic behavior. And that's exactly what happened at a company called RI. RI is an outdoor apparel company that was facing some major challenges. They had a toxic work culture and it was affecting their bottom line. But instead of just trying to fix the symptoms, they decided to tackle the root cause of the problem. They started by creating a new set of company values that emphasized teamwork, respect, and open communication. They also made a conscious effort to hire people who shared those values. And it paid off. RI's culture completely transformed and their employees started to thrive. They became more engaged, more productive, and more committed to the company's mission. So, what can we learn from these examples? First, it's clear that idiotic behavior can have a significant impact on teams and organizations. But it's also clear that there are steps we can take to mitigate those effects. By addressing conflicts promptly and fostering a positive work culture, we can create a shield that protects us from the negative effects of idiotic behavior. And that's exactly what Thomas Erikson recommends in his book. He suggests that we focus on building strong relationships with our colleagues, and that we prioritize open and honest communication. By doing so, we can create a work environment that's resistant to the negative effects of idiotic behavior. So, the next time you're faced with a difficult team member or a toxic work culture, remember that there is hope. By taking the right steps, you can transform your team and your organization into a positive and productive place to work. And that's a goal worth striving for. Now, let's take a closer look at how we can apply these principles in our own lives. How can we create a positive work culture? And what steps can we take to address conflicts promptly? We'll explore those questions in more depth as we continue on this journey. But for now, let's just say that it's time to take a stand against idiotic behavior and start building the kind of work environment that we all deserve. Section 5, I've always been fascinated by the idea that we're all, to some extent, idiots. I mean, think about it. We've all done things that, in hindsight, make us wonder what on earth we were thinking. But here's the thing. Being an idiot isn't a fixed state. We can change, we can grow, and we can become more aware of our behavior. And that's exactly what we're going to explore in this part of our journey together. Let's start with a story. I have a friend who, for a long time, struggled with anger issues. He would lash out at the smallest things, and it was starting to affect his relationships with the people around him. But one day something changed. He had a bit of a meltdown in front of a close friend, and that friend did something remarkable. Instead of getting angry or defensive, the friend simply looked at him and said, I've noticed that you get really angry when you're stressed or feeling overwhelmed. Is that something you're aware of? My friend was taken aback. No one had ever pointed this out to him before, and it made him realize that he wasn't just an angry person. He was a person who was struggling to cope with stress. This moment of insight was a turning point for him. He started to work on his stress management, and slowly but surely, his anger issues began to fade away. This story highlights the importance of self-awareness in personal growth. When we're aware of our behavior, we can start to make changes. We can start to recognize patterns and triggers, and we can develop strategies to deal with them. But how do we become more self-aware in the first place? One of the key factors is feedback. We need people around us who are willing to tell us the truth even when it's hard to hear. This is something that Thomas Erikson emphasizes in his book, Surrounded by Idiots. He argues that we need to surround ourselves with people who are willing to give us honest feedback and that we need to be open to receiving it. But feedback from others is only half the story. We also need to develop the habit of self-reflection. This means taking the time to think about our behavior, our motivations, and our values. It means asking ourselves tough questions like, why did I react that way? Or what's driving my behavior in this situation? One of the most powerful tools for self-reflection is journaling. By writing down our thoughts and feelings, we can start to identify patterns and gain insights into our behavior. I know someone who started journaling as a way to deal with anxiety, and it completely transformed their life. They were able to identify triggers and develop strategies to cope with them, and as a result, they became much more confident and self-assured. Of course, journaling isn't the only way to develop self-awareness. Therapy can also be a powerful tool. A good therapist can help us identify patterns and gain insights into our behavior, and they can provide us with strategies to make positive changes. But here's the thing, self-awareness isn't a one-time achievement. It's a continuous process. We need to keep working at it day in and day out if we want to see real growth and development. And that's okay. It's okay to take things one step at a time, and it's okay to make mistakes along the way. As Thomas Erikson says in his book, the biggest idiot is the one who thinks they're not an idiot. We're all idiots to some extent, but that's not the point. The point is that we can change, we can grow, and we can become more aware of our behavior. And that's a journey worth taking. So, what's the next step on this journey? How can we start to develop greater self-awareness, and what are some strategies for making positive changes in our lives? We'll explore these questions and more as we continue on our journey together. But for now, let's just take a moment to reflect on the importance of self-awareness and the incredible impact it can have on our lives. Section 6. You know, I've always been fascinated by people who seem to navigate the chaos of life with ease. They're like the superheroes of the everyday, dodging annoying colleagues, infuriating neighbors, and frustrating friends with a smile on their face. But what's their secret? Is it a special power? A magic potion? Or is it just a healthy dose of humor and a strong sense of self-awareness? As we've explored throughout this book, being surrounded by idiots can be, well, infuriating. But it's also an opportunity to learn, grow, and develop some essential skills for surviving and even thriving in a world filled with, shall we say, challenging people. So, let's take a step back and summarize the key takeaways from our journey so far. First and foremost, maintaining a sense of humor is crucial. When we can laugh at the absurdity of life, we're better equipped to handle the inevitable frustrations that come our way. I remember a friend who used to work in a particularly toxic office environment. Every day, she'd come home with a new story about her boss's latest antics or her coworkers' mind-boggling incompetence. But instead of getting bogged down in the negativity, she'd laugh about it. She'd regale us with tales of the office politics, using funny voices and exaggerated expressions. And you know what? It was infectious. We'd all end up in stitches, and suddenly, the absurdity of it all didn't seem so overwhelming. Of course, humor isn't always the answer. Sometimes we need to set clear boundaries to protect ourselves from the idiots in our lives. I had a friend who was a total people pleaser. She'd say yes to every request, no matter how unreasonable, and then wonder why she was always stressed and exhausted. But one day, she realized that she had the power to say no. She started setting healthy boundaries, prioritizing her own needs and desires. And you know what? She found peace. She was no longer beholden to everyone else's whims and fancies. She was free to be herself without apology. Self-awareness is also essential for navigating difficult relationships. When we understand our own strengths, weaknesses, and motivations, we're better equipped to handle the idiots in our lives. We can recognize when we're being triggered and take steps to manage our emotions. We can identify when someone is pushing our buttons and choose not to engage. And we can develop strategies for dealing with those people who seem to delight in driving us crazy. For example, I know someone who has a colleague who loves to provoke her. This colleague will make snide comments, question her expertise, and generally try to get a rise out of her. But instead of taking the bait, my friend uses humor to diffuse the situation. She'll laugh and say, "Oh, you're trying to wind me up again, aren't you?" Or, "I see what you're doing there, and it's not going to work." By acknowledging the behavior and refusing to engage, she takes the power away from her colleague and maintains her own sense of calm. Finally, prioritizing self-care is crucial for surviving in a world of idiots. When we take care of ourselves physically, emotionally, and mentally, we're better equipped to handle the challenges that come our way. We can recognize when we're feeling overwhelmed and take steps to recharge. We can prioritize our own needs and say no to requests that don't align with our values or goals. And we can develop a sense of resilience, bouncing back from setbacks and difficult interactions with ease. So, as we conclude our journey through the world of idiots, remember that you have the power to choose how you respond to the challenging people in your life. You can laugh at the absurdity of it all, set clear boundaries, develop self-awareness, and prioritize self-care. And when all else fails, you can always recall the wise words of Thomas Erikson, the author of this book. You can't fix the idiots, but you can fix how you react to them. By adopting these strategies, you'll be better equipped to navigate the inevitable frustrations of life, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find that the idiots in your life become a little less infuriating. So go ahead, take a deep breath, and step back into the fray. With humor, self-awareness, and a healthy dose of skepticism, you'll be ready for whatever the world throws your way. Conclusion: after diving deep into Thomas Erikson's Surrounded by Idiots, I have to say, my perspective on the world has shifted. I used to think that the key to surviving in a world filled with, well, idiots was to develop a thick skin and a sharp tongue. But Erikson's insights have shown me that there's a better way. Throughout this book, we've explored the importance of empathy in understanding others, the benefits of self-awareness in personal growth, and the power of humor in navigating difficult relationships. And I have to say, it's been a game changer for me. I've started to see that even the most challenging people in my life aren't just obstacles to be overcome, but opportunities for growth and connection. I remember a friend who used to work with someone who was, shall we say, a bit of a handful. This coworker was always complaining, always criticizing, and always making life difficult for everyone around them. But my friend decided to take a different approach. Instead of getting defensive or dismissive, they started to ask this coworker questions, to really listen to their concerns, and to try to understand where they were coming from. And you know what? It worked. The coworker started to open up, to share their fears and their struggles, and my friend was able to find common ground with them. It's amazing how a little bit of empathy can go a long way. And it's not just about resolving conflicts or avoiding difficult conversations. It's about creating a deeper sense of connection and understanding with the people around us. When we take the time to really see and hear each other, we start to realize that we're not so different after all. So, as we wrap up this journey through Surrounded by Idiots, I want to leave you with a challenge. The next time you find yourself facing a difficult person or a tough situation, I want you to try something different. Instead of getting frustrated or angry, try to find the humor in it. Try to see the absurdity or the irony and let that be your guide. And instead of trying to change the other person or control the situation, try to approach it with empathy and understanding. It's not always easy and it's not always intuitive. But I promise you, it's worth it. When we learn to navigate the world with humor and empathy, we start to see that even the most challenging people and situations can become opportunities for growth, connection, and transformation. So, go out there and give it a try. Your sanity and your relationships will thank you.